there's different versions of shamanism, and there are different versions of where the word came from. The Sanskrit word shramana literally means phenomenon. The word was first coined to describe the belief system of a tribe in central Siberia called the Tungus. And the defining text, maybe 60, 80 years ago, was extremely significant. And if you're interested in looking at a fascinating academic work, there's a book called The Psycho-Mental Complex of the Tungus. So I'll say it again, and later if you ask me, I'll probably have forgotten it. The Psycho-Mental Complex of the Tungus. And the Tungus are a tribe. The author was a Russian named Shira Korgorov. Now, I was given that text by a yoga teacher to study so I could get a grasp of what shamanism was about. And later that text led me to other things, namely to Charles Muse's, whose webpage I gave you earlier, which is at www.lionpath.com. And Charles Muse's, God bless him, just died about 1.5 years ago. And we had a brief but significant email correspondence where he kicked me in the butt and praised me all at the same time. Okay? He was a remarkable man. He was also the mentor for Gene Roddenberry, who wrote the Star Trek series. Okay? He was interested in higher mathematics, and he pioneered the study of chronotopology, which is the study of the flow of time and how time tends to pulsate and have opportunities and disopportunities like a heartbeat. He wrote a text called Destiny and Human Control Systems, where he designated which starry constellations go directly overhead and open which plant blossoms. So he provided us with some of the most solid astrological, physiological science. So the scientists literally were presented with facts that showed the stars affect everything on this living planet directly. So it's not just a fantasy, and it's not just a poetic suggestion, nor is it a simple mythology handed down. It is science, and I have to stress that because that is where most of us have our indoctrination. Okay. So you can bring your little red wagon of mythology, history, fantasy, illusion, dream, archetype, and you can also plop into it clear, cold, hard, mean-spirited science. And they will all tell you the same thing. So this is about the first time we've had this agreement that the shaman were scientists. So this is a sort of radical idea, but I would like you to hold this very dear to yourself like that elephant. And we're going to go on to a sort of model to talk about who took this away from us, and if we already had science, why did we need science? And what did science do? And what happened? What happened to shamanism? It's very important, especially since it hasn't gone anywhere. Okay. Now, I'm going to start with the negative, and we're going to build to the positive. So I'm going to say something really nasty. Institutional religion. Okay. And I want you all to tell me something negative about institutional religion.
Dogma.
Sexist.
Come on.
Guilt.
Greed. Sentimentalism.
I can tell you guys are my kind of people. Okay. Sentimentalism. You probably write better than I do, though. Go ahead.
Malicious ignorance, superstitious nonsense, office arrogance.
You're talking too fast. Superstitious, malicious, what's the other one? Arrogance. You've definitely got the spirit of the bard.
Control.
Control.
Blind faith.
I'm not going to use the word faith.
Sectorial separation is a negative.
Rationalization of atrocity.
Bloodthirsty.
This is truly a house of theology. Bloodthirsty. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's still kind of fun.
Patriarchs.
Patriarch. I'm tired.
Infallibility.
Oh, there's a frightening concept. Infallible. Anything else?
Corruption.
You know, that's simple enough. Okay.
Politics.
Self-serving, self-propagating.
Someone said,
Opiate of the masses.
yeah. Just be sure you don't speak too close to the ketchup bottle at dinner. Okay?
Security, false security.
False, oh,
Hypocrisy.
false security. Yeah, okay. I think that's enough. It's a pretty hefty screen. Now, since I'm following a sort of Platonic tradition here, I want you to take these words, and these are a screen, obviously. But these things are not presented in institutional religion in that form, are they? So the question is, how do you take all of these negative traits and present them so that people accept them?
You lie.
You do, but it's got to look pretty. So what do they use? What is used by religion so that it's acceptable and easily digested?
Sense of community.
Subterfuge.
Faith.
Promise of results, promise of reward.
Other languages.
Ooh, that's something pretty devious. Yes. I would not just say other languages, but I would certainly say manipulated languages. And someone said something else. Repeat, please.
Subterfuge.
Subterfuge, I would take that in here, but the abuse of language is very significant. And I would add something else, the abuse of symbols. Am I making sense to all of you? Yes? Abuse of language, abuse of symbols. Now basically that's as far as we need to go, because what I want you to see is that the language and the symbols that are used by any institution are designed to present you with a fulfillment of your need. Am I making sense? Yeah? All right. So language is fine, symbols are fine, but when they are made to cover up all this other material, what you find is you sort of have a Madison Avenue philosophy of if we can make it slick and glossy enough, people will want it and they'll accept it, and eventually they'll think they need it, and by God, they'll even pay for it. Am I making sense to everybody?
Right.
So I want you to see the screen presented by institutional religion through which they present to you ideas is an extremely cunning. It's extremely cunning and intelligent, and it's developed over time. It's matured. So it's pretty dangerous. Now, Rudolf Steiner, who was a theosophist early on, said something about how evil was becoming intelligent. And he called it the mission of evil. In other words, what is evil's job? What do you think it is? Destruction? Tell me more. Ignorance?
Control.
Control?
Temptation.
Temptation?
An alternate universe,
Injury.
A what kind of universe?
alternate.
Alternate, or would you say false?
One that they own.
Sure.
Okay. Power. Power is an important part of the equation of life, so we've got to take note of that. Keep that in mind, because I want to come back to power. If I don't, wave at me and do some jumping jacks. Power. Okay, so religion has taken all of these things. Evil has become intelligent. And you see this amazing cunning where you're presented with a very beautiful portrait of something that you have as a fulfilled need. You're watching television. Is television real?
No.
That was an awful long delay. There's a couple on the beach. Now, what does it remind you of? Think of it. A tropical paradise and a man and a woman. Yeah?
Fulfillment.
Fulfillment. Now, is there anything wrong with a tropical paradise?
No.
Is there anything wrong with a fulfilled man and woman? Okay. And is there anything wrong with this whole idea of an idyllic existence? So that picture is shown to you, and you hear a quiet voice say, "The purple pill." You understand what I'm saying now? The image they give you is correct. It's beautiful and it's good. What they attach to the image is not something that will work to your benefit because it's bringing this in. Just say yes if you understand that. Okay. First step over. So I know it's all rotten and horrible, but there's a reason that people buy that purple pill. Why do people buy that purple pill?
Relief.
Relief?
Laziness, because they want to be on the beach under the palm tree.
They want to be on the beach under those palm trees. They're lazy. Yeah, what else?
It promises fulfillment.
Promises fulfillment. Keep going.
Escape.
Escape. Yeah. And I'm going to give you a new word today for you to think with. Inscape. I want you to think about this a little bit, because you've got things inside that are unmapped. All right? So, we're going to now talk about what happened, because this grid of institutionalized religion at one time wasn't institutionalized, was it? If you went back, what was it? Intuitive? Keep talking to me.
Community. Personal relationship.
Yes? Keep going. Good word.
Guiding.
See, what I want you to realize is you're now transforming evil. You're transforming evil. You have the power to encounter evil and transform it by going through it, passing through that complex, aggravating screen and getting to source points. Because evil is usually simply a shift of what is good. Am I making sense to all of you? So keep talking, guiding, mystical. Tell me more.
Real.
Entertaining.
I didn't say fun.
Stellular imprinted. Stellular imprinted.
Spell that.
Like, I don't know, good luck. From the stars, it's imprinted
Ah.
within us. It is our
Stellar.
stellar stellar.
Stellar imprinted.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Just like the brain on an Arctic tern when he flies from one pole to the other.
That's what you were thinking, right?
That's what it is. Yeah.
Beauty. There's an old-fashioned idea.
Direct.
Clairvoyant.
Ooh. Clairvoyant.
Natural.
Yeah.
Influx.
Non-institutional.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And I'll give you a concept that the church fathers talked about before the church became really institutionalized. They called it the priesthood of the believer. And that meant everybody had the capacity to be a priest. Okay. Of course, what did that do with the role of the priest? Now, the reason this has 9 squares is because the magic square of 9 was one of the oldest grids. You know it as a tic-tac-toe board. It was one of the oldest grids used by shaman around the world. And if you bring a man from China in and he puts a circle in here and he says this is north and this is south, this is west and east, he'll fill these squares in with animals, directions, medicines, and planets. Okay? In other words, he'll fill it with all these things you've been talking about. Simple, beautiful, immediate, knowing, all right? So the screen of the institution has filtered out all these things, and yet because of its intelligence, it's succeeded in 2 things. And these are the 2 words that are the enemy of every free soul: coercion and seduction. Okay. Those are the enemies of freedom. All right? So when you're here, you've got 2 forces: coercion and seduction. You're either forced or you're seduced. Here, absolute freedom exists within this sort of simple gradient. Does that make sense to everybody? I need you to grunt louder.
Yes.
Okay. That guy can really draw on the board an awful lot quicker. Okay. So what was good has become corrupt, and we can get back to what is good. But I want to stress that we can't go back because things are not the same. Are they? Now, of course, you know I'm talking about shamanism. We can't go back to the old shamanism because what has changed? You tell me what's changed. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to lecture so you can just fall asleep. Okay. Not really. That's a joke. Consciousness. Consciousness has changed. This is the time of the sometimes called the consciousness what? And you might say, well, what happened before this? It was the what, James?
Kind of intellectual soul.
Yeah. Before this, we were in, I'm going to go over here with it, the intellectual soul. Now, I won't go into all these details, but basically, the previous few hundred years, science was born, and people spent a lot of time proving things. Am I making sense? Prove it, prove it. You ever had an 8-year-old? Prove it, okay. We've proven it. We've proven it so much the world's just about completely destroyed. Okay? Because we proved it. Now, because we proved it, people are not happy with knowing things. Because what happened is, well, the 60s happened, and before that, there were several other things that happened. I won't get into all the details, but basically people experimented with machinery, and then they experimented with drugs, and then they experimented with their bodies, and they became more and more aware and this means that they realized that there were things that were a lot bigger than what they could just understand. If what I said makes sense, raise your hand. Okay. So there's a limit. There's a limit to this. So now we're here. Okay. We're at this point of consciousness. Okay. So what that means is someone like Charles Muses went back and he found a formula by some of the Egyptian priest shamans, and I put them together because a shaman is someone who's actually doing it, not just a bureaucrat, okay? But he went back as a scientist and he followed the clues of the old shamans and he put it together. He put the devotion and the intuitive awareness and the formulas of the shaman with science to come up with a model that fulfilled the requirements of both shamanism and what? The S word. Science. So that at this point, we have these two S's. Now, you still cannot go to Georgetown Medical School and tell them this. Okay, but I know doctors in Georgetown Medical School who actually pray before they do an experiment. So you need to know that it's sort of leaking under the doors and through the windows now. Okay, they'll say that's not science and they won't talk about it in the building, but they will admit that it's happening. So this is kind of what is happening. Now there was a writer named Owen Barfield, and I went to see Owen before he died. He was about 100 years old. He was a friend of C.S. Lewis and a man that you'll be familiar with named J.R.R. Tolkien. Have you ever heard of him? Well, Barfield was a friend of theirs, and I went to see him because he was an expert on poetry. And what he said about poetry was it demonstrated the change of consciousness through history. And I'll give you a simple example. Early consciousness, the heart or the soul was compared to a harp. They used to talk about the strings of the harp being plucked. Have you heard this? This is old poetry. This goes back. The Irish had a harp, the Egyptians had a harp. So it goes back, back, back. Now, when the camera was discovered with optics, they started talking about the eye of the heart in poetry. So for 1 minute you had something like a musical instrument because the wind could blow across the strings of a harp if you left it in the window and you'd hear a sound. So they had the Aeolian harp even in ancient Greece. And then when someone came up with this new device called a camera obscura, which let light in through a hole and produced an image on a wall, then the poets started talking about the what of the heart? Eye of the heart. So in the poetry of different cultures through time, you'll read the heart described according to the level of consciousness. So for some it was a heart, for some it was an eye. And before these, it was often described in the way you would describe an animal. Heart like an eagle, heart like a stag, heart like a snake, heart like a what?
Lion,
Give me some examples.
coyote,
Coyote. Any more?
otter,
Otter. Give me some animals.
lamb,
Say
lamb,
clam. Yeah. Anything else?
bear,
Bear.
Eagle.
Eagle.
Falcon.
falcon,
Moose.
moose,
Lamb.
Monkey.
monkey. My mother used to call me a monkey. All right. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is I want you to see that the poets, every old culture had poets, and they carried with them the consciousness, and to this day, if you read modern poets, you'll see glimpses of things that will happen in the future. So if you want to know where we're going in here, you read the modern poets. If you want to know what we've been through, who do you read? The old poets. Okay. And if you read them both, you have a sense of where you fit into history, which is nice, because we're not really taught we fit in at all. Okay. So, when these are put together, and you're working with the consciousness soul, there's a bridge. Okay, and the bridge is formed between symbols and language. Now, the nice thing about this is the symbols and language that connect us through history, connects us with the spirits of the dead. You know, the Roman Catholics have something called the Communion of Souls. You heard of this?
Communion of Saints.
Yeah, Communion of Saints. This is because there's something in common. So that there are certain things that have not changed through history. They're still the same. This is extremely important for us. Because if I say a wolf, or if I say a coyote or an eagle or a dolphin, I don't think there's disagreement about what it is. True or false? Okay. So what you find is that the old shamanism has a universal language. Am I making sense? And it's still applicable even though our consciousness is what?
Restored knowledge.
Even though our consciousness had shifted and changed, a lot of these old things, they have not. Okay. We've changed somewhat in relation to them, but they still provoke certain of the same feelings. Does everybody understand? Making sense? Okay. And what I want you to do now is have this fresh idea of shamanism, which is old, but it's transcultural. And I'll leave the planets up here because that's our closest connection to heaven in here. Stars, planets, okay, sun, moon, stars. You look up and you have a certain feeling. And that hasn't changed. Now, you can look up at the sun and say, well, that's just a big bundle of gas. But tell me, when the sun shines on you, what does it feel like? Tell me.
Warm,
More? Tell me more.
Happy.
Yes?
comforting,
Yes?
Your heart,
Yes?
conscious presence.
Yes?
Energy.
Mm-hmm. Healing. All right, so what it's made of is not a determinant of what it is. Make sense? Because we can reduce each other to about $2 worth of mud, right? Okay. So have this idea that these things, what they are is much bigger than what they can be reduced to. And it's slowly coming to that in science, but they like to drag their heels because of the control issues involved. Now, what I'd like to talk about briefly, and is everybody clear about what I've said so far? Okay. What I'd like to talk about briefly is what makes prayer work and why prayer doesn't work. What do you think of that? Okay. People say, I prayed, and nothing happened. Or I got worse. And of course, that couldn't be an answer. So we have to ask, what makes it work? And so I'm going to go from here. See how we're doing for time. Talk about shamanism. And we're going to talk about prayer. because I'm very interested in how things work. I'm just a kid at heart. I don't know what makes it work. I want to get results. There's no time to waste. Okay, life is short. So this idea of prayer, because a shaman is a man who prays, right? Okay. What else is a shaman? Meditates? Okay, where does the word meditation come from?
Healer. Healer.
Now, I want to just draw this out for you. Healer comes from Helios, which is the sun. Okay? Meditation comes from mediator, which is the same as medium. Okay. So I want to make a quick transition of information here, because this is quite something. All right. Now, we talked about the priesthood of the believer, so anyone can be a healer, true or false? True. Of course. And the Tibetan Buddhists used to have a quiz for their doctors, and they'd say, tell us what is poison. And the students would stew and come up with belladonna, henbane, and all these things. But the answer is basically, everything that can be applied at the right time is medicine, and nothing is poison if it's applied at the right time. Does that make sense? So the timing of everything is what makes it medicine, and it was up to this person to know the timing. Okay? Say it makes sense. And the old way of keeping time was looking at what? Okay. Yeah. So I want you to see how significant this is, and also how scientific it is, and why so much time was spent studying the sun and building Stonehenge and looking at the movement of planets and things. Because it was up to the person to have this sense of timing. Okay? So this is really significant. And this will save us a lot of misunderstanding about why prayer works or doesn't work. Now, I want to go back to the prayer thing. We're all pretty clear that the shaman could be anybody, and anybody could be a healer. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. And I just picked that word because it's generally applied from research done in Central Asia, but it can be applied to anyone in any country. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we're just going to go to Hawaii because I had access to some Huna teaching, and they have a nice model of how consciousness works. Because this is probably one of the most brilliant expositions on why a shaman would do a ritual. Has anyone ever done a ritual? Yeah? Okay. All right, well, I'll tell you, you've all done a ritual. Okay, but you may not know you did a ritual, but if you get up and brush your teeth, you're doing a ritual. So we're talking about a ritual or a rite. Now, I would like someone to not describe how they would pray, because that would be a dangerous thing. But how would you say the average person prays?
Petition.
It's a petition. Okay, tell me more. Think about it. How does a person pray?
And we pray out.
Yeah, pray out. I like that. Yeah. Like if we yelled loud enough, someone would hear.
Quite often with eyes closed.
Eyes closed. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, tell me more.
It's often a
We should put in-
recitation.
Say that.
It's often a recitation.
Recitation.
The prayer should be inside first. Must hear yourself first, not out.
And then there's this idea of recitation or repeating it, like God is very old and hard to hear.
Proper posture.
Posture?
Proper posture.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to put posture here because some people bow and some people don't, and some people jump up and all that.
They could
Bargaining.
Yeah, they could use a sacrifice. Bargaining.
Sometimes it's aimed in a specific direction.
The deal. I like that. I like the political sound. Okay. And what was that? Anger directed? Who said that?
Says a direction, some people pray in a specific direction up to the east.
Oh, I see. This is direction. All right. Anything else? Tim?
Wholehearted truth. Wholehearted truth. With every part of your
Wholehearted.
being.
Yeah.
Pray with truth in your being.
Wholehearted. Okay, now.
About the sacrifice.
Sacrifice. They pray with a sacrifice?
No, sacrifice is part of the prayer.
Yeah, you give up something,
It's part of the deal of
I'll give you a lamb.
I'll give you a piece of chocolate if you let me do it.
Yeah,
Fear, there's
Ooh.
usually coming from a place of fear.
Yeah.
emotion.
Emotion,
Unceasing
constant.
gratitude.
All right, now. That's pretty good. That's a lot of stuff. Okay, so this person is praying and they mean it, and they say it over and over, and they yell real loud and they bow a lot, and their eyes are closed tightly, and they're afraid, and they're trying to make this deal. What does it sound like?
Unbelief.
Work.
It comes immediately, exactly.
Yeah. Do you see what's happening?
Sound like whining.
Yeah. All right. Now, I'll add something. Usually, when somebody prays, there's not one person praying. There's several people praying. Because most of us are not one person. You understand? Most of us have very mixed intentions. And so when we sit down and pray, what goes out of us is about 20 or 30 different motives. Now that means the reply has to come in about 20 or 30 different forms. And since we don't agree with ourselves, the answers can't agree. Do I make sense to you?
Does that make sense?
So if there's not one person praying, there cannot be one answer for that person. And that is probably the most common mistake in prayer, is to assume that you are one motive. And this is why, as James and I have had long talks, even the most ancient shaman valued the art of concentration, which is the way of assembling the divided wills within yourself to do a common task. Now this is very much connected to the knowledge that was derived from studying the movement of herds of animals. All right? And if you've ever seen a flock of birds turning in the air, do they run into each other? You ever seen a herd of cattle moving? Okay. Cattle, sheep. Okay. And of course there are animals who don't herd too. But what I want you to have in your mind is the idea that there's individual freedoms and there's this multiplicity of wills in you. But if you can synchronize them, if you can get all your sheep together, if you can be your own shepherd, all right, then you can get these wills to come into some sort of alignment so that you have a solid force, so that when you make a request or ask a question, there is a sort of unified will. Make sense? Okay. Yes, that's how healing works, and that is how shamanism works. But what I wanted to point out was how this is closely related to the relationship of human beings to animals and other living things. These were principles that were observed by shaman and recorded here, and sometimes in songs. And these songs were considered extremely sacred and still are. So shamans would have a kinship with different animals, and that would be sort of their model for helping themselves work with themselves. Here's the Huna model. This symbol I'll explain this before we dive in. We have about 3 minutes left. And then you'll all know how to get miracles done. And you can pray for me.
Okay.
This is a very old Chinese character, and it's the character for king, and it's pronounced Wong. And there's an old pun that 6 billion Chinese can't be all Wong. You can't all be king, but as a shaman, you can all be king. But what it shows is there is 3 levels, and if we took the top bar and the bottom bar off, we'd have a cross, which you'd recognize from Christianity or Egyptian training or from looking through the crosshairs of a rifle. Now these 3 levels symbolized earth, heaven, and what is called the underworld, which we always think of as something abstract and not here. Now, the Chinese and the old shamans in every culture said the human being basically stands there and they stand up. And there's 2 things in nature that stand straight up, and one is a human and one is a tree. And so the tree was sacred. And some of the oldest meditations were about going into a tree and turning around and putting your arms through the branches like a coat. And then you reach up through the branches and connect to the stars, and you reach down through your feet and you connect to the underworld, which is also the dead. And then you let yourself fall asleep. And you wake up the next day with the answer you needed, because you're able to spread yourself very thin. Does that make sense to you? So this standing figure, okay, there's the tree. Heaven, earth, underworld. Now, most people who stand on the earth, they look up to heaven and say, I want that, I need this. But the old shaman and the old Huna priests and the old Taoists, every culture, they said, you can't go direct. You got to go down first. And so the old goddess temples looked like beehives, and the door led down into the ground. And there was an archway, and there was a woman with her legs open in the arch, and they believed that you were going into the mother. And that girl was called a gargoyle, and later she was transplanted onto cathedrals as a gargoyle. It changed her shape and made her look evil. Okay? The Irish called her Sheelanigig. Okay? And you were going into the Earth Mother, and you were going down, and you were going into the dark, warm, quiet, still, solid, fertile, safe place. And it had nothing to do with punishment. It was where you had to go to get to the stars. So, the Huna and many of the others say to go down, you do a ritual, because when you do a ritual, there is something deep down inside you that has to see what you're talking about. Now, you want something. What do you want? Well, I want food. Okay? So I'm going to put out a ritual table. Here's the ritual table. Now, it's very important that the things deep down inside of you can come up in your body and look at what's on this table. We call it a subconscious. But what people don't realize is it's a superconscious. Okay? So, what do you want? Let's put it on the table. Call a few things out. We'll finish up. You want to have good food? Yes or no?
Yes.
I'll put a loaf of bread on the table. Does that sound familiar? Okay. Do you want good wine? Okay. Okay. If you're Baptist, that's okay. We'll just put orange juice. All right. What else do you want?
Fish.
Okay. Put it down there. Honey? You old Persian, you. Okay. Honey it is. Tell me more.
Good harvest.
A good harvest, put some grain on the table.
Eggs. Eggs.
Eggs. Eggs go down. Okay. Let me ask you this. Do you want light? And you put a candle on the table. What else? Do you want to smell good? And you put incense on the table.
Got some money.
You want some money. Put some money on the table. In fact, the more you can put on the table, the better. I like to put gold on the table. You want precious jewels,
Music.
music, maybe a bell.
Love.
He wants love.
Orientation.
He wants orientation, so we'll put a compass on the table. Now it's starting to turn into a medicine wheel. Okay. Are you worried about your family? Then you put a picture of them on the table. Are you worried about your ancestors? Because they have to go on the table. Okay. And they're all here anyway. But there's something in you that has to come up and look out onto the table and see these things. It needs to see these things. And it is your larger self, because what you see of me and what I see of you is just a tip of an iceberg of something much, much bigger. It's like that wardrobe in C.S. Lewis where you open the doors and it's a lot bigger on the inside. Okay, and we're all like that. So we have this ritual table. Anything else on it before we pray over it?
Nice car.
Who wants a nice car? Put a car on there. Okay. So I want you to see
For self-healing, what I put on the table.
self-healing. Now some things are conceptual, so what you do is you get out a piece of paper and you write them out very clearly and carefully, because a scribbled request is a scribbled answer. All right? So there, it's ready. Now, when you look at what is offered, all these different wills, that great herd of sheep inside you, they all get together and look out your eyes and your nose and your ears, and they look at this thing on the table. So for a moment, you're what?
Unified.
Yes. Focused. And if you give the one thing no one wants to give, if you sit there and give it time, then you'll really get focused. And the more drama, the better, because these wills have to be brought together. So there's a certain necessity for the drama. Okay? You get in what you put out. All right? Now, there are some very diabolical ways to use that. Can you imagine? All right. So you must be aware that how this is done requires some great attention to detail and care. It has to be very clean. Some people would fast for 30 days before constructing an altar. So I want you to realize this is why you see these old Tibetans shining all the ritual implements for hours each before they put them on the table. You don't want to give up anything dusty and old. You understand? It's got to be pristine and clear. It must impress who? You've got to impress yourself. So, there's a communion cup and there's a sacred stag. It's out there, it's impressed. The message goes down below into that great, quiet, still, motherly place. Okay? And for those of you interested in the Christian version, when the blood of Christ ran down the cross into the earth, it became a homeopathic remedy. And that means when you do underworld teaching, you're working with Christian energy. How do you like that? So that means all the shamans are what?
Christians.
Yeah. So the message goes up from there to what we call heaven or the stars, and in a few days, depending on how fast you want your answer, you'll get an answer. And it will be based on what you offered as a single person. Okay. And that is shamanism. Okay. And you can do it for other people. You can do it for yourself. Okay? One last thing. I mentioned the Huna, and I just wanted to say that when they do a ritual, they always invite all of the ancestors into the room, and they forgive them. They don't ask for forgiveness, okay? Because we're carrying things from the past, yes or no? So what do? You invite, tell me. You invite them all there. And you think about who you are and what you become and what you're carrying, and you turn to them, and what do? And it doesn't take long, does it? It's very quick, isn't it? I'm not going to tell you.
No.
And when you're clear about what's been forgiven, you let them talk to each other. You have to wait, because they've got a lot to say to each other. And you say, well, this is not very productive. I'm just sitting here and it's so quiet. All I can tell you is see what you feel inside yourself while you're waiting. Because there's an awful lot of things going on in the outside, around you. So you invite them, you forgive them, and then what? Wait. Please wait. Okay. Sometimes they wait for days. Okay, sometimes they walk in a circle one way and they invite everybody, and then as many times as they walk the circle one way, they have to turn and walk the other way to give them an equal amount of time to talk. Now, after that process, then you are allowed to think what it would be like if you got the answer to your prayer in the way you asked. And you're then supposed to wait and think about that for a while. You understand? We talked about time. So that means you've really got to invite everybody, forgive them, and wait, let them talk. And then you've got to spend time thinking, what if I get this answer? What would it be like? You realize people pray all the time and they don't think about what it would be like if they got the answer? They're in such a hurry to get stuff. Am I making sense to everyone? So it's only after you've done that and you're clear in your mind what it would be like to get an answer that it's over. The prayer is over. And when I mean over, I mean it's really over. Do you go back and jump up and down and do it again?
Yeah.
No. Do you think you'll forget what you did? No. You won't.
Yes.
You might forget some of it, but believe me, it'll make an impression. Okay. So that's your introduction to shamanism. Now, I just wanted to present a sort of historical line and to give you a working technique. Okay? And I talked to my friend Tom Goodman, who's here, who is a traditional American Indian shaman. Now, the reason I wanted Tom here, and the reason I invited him to speak next week, is because I gave you a general template, but he's from around here. He's from this country, and each country has its own spirits. Each land has its own elemental spirits. Am I making sense? And so, I am not qualified to talk about these spirits. I don't know them that well, but Tom is. And he's doing a lot of different kinds of work, so he's speaking next week. And I want you to realize that all of this knowledge eventually has to become local, and it has to become personal, because it's the land that controls your dreams. This is where you go when you sleep, your rumination, the rivers and in the earth. So keep in mind, Tom, would you stand up for just a minute so they can see you? You're going to be here next week, right?
November 2nd.
November 2nd?
Yep.
All right. So, behold the man. So I'll be back to see him. All right, thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Alan. We're just going to go through a few minutes of announcements.